One of the things it talks about a lot is this concept of image, which is the main way I use Yi Jing in understanding medicine, in like understanding the operating system of medicine. Once I understood that image was the way ancient people looked at the medicine, I've really tried to like pull that back in and use it in my teaching.
Hi, I'm Michael Max, and this is Qiological, the podcast for practitioners of acupuncture and East Asian medicine that connects together the voices of our community. How often have you heard this? I'm no good at marketing. I don't know anything about business. I hate selling, or I'm not a business person. It's kind of a mantra in our profession, and like any mantra or recurring thought, it will over time create exactly what it is that we're thinking about. In truth, I'm no stranger to these beliefs. And even though I grew up in a family of small business people, a family where people mostly didn't have a job, they had a business, it's taken the engaging of the practice of medicine to open me up to the importance of really engaging the practice of practice. What if the business of your practice wasn't separate from the practice of your medicine? And what if you gave as much attention to your business as you did to your patients? After all, the business is what allows you to have those patients in the first place. I'd like to invite you, even if just for a moment or two each day, that instead of thinking as your business as something that you, air quotes here, have to do, it's actually something that you get to do. To connect with how it's a privilege to be in a position to craft your practice and your business in a way that reflects who you are and who you want to become. I get it that we are constantly interrupted, pitched, spammed, and if we're not careful, cheated by less than ethical people out there to steal our attention, time, or money. But I think it's a big mistake to say that marketing is evil. And it's disingenuous too, because really we all are in the marketing business. If you've been on a date, you've tried to sell yourself to someone else. And if you got kids, they're pitching you all the time. And you do it to them as well. And even with your patients, you're probably constantly marketing, constantly coaxing, teaching, suggesting that they somehow find a way to improve their health. Sometimes we are simply trying to sell our patients on themselves. Consider that marketing is nothing more than skillful human communication. And yeah, those marketers that we find annoying, it's usually because they're unskilled or they have failed to recognize we're not interested in what they have to offer. Good marketing, really good marketing, and sales for that matter, is not about forcing something on someone that they don't want. It's about creating and delivering something they've been wanting and waiting for. It's about being attentive to what our patients and our potential patients want and how we might be able to help. If the focus is more on what you get from the interaction, then yeah, you might be moving into some smarmy territory. But if you are clear that what you have to offer and respect that it might not be for the person that you're offering it to, then there's nothing unethical about what you're doing. And really, when we say we're not good at marketing, we're cutting ourselves off from vast communication resources that we've already got. And we're throwing up roadblocks to creating a business that will take us to where we want to go. It helps to know what you're about. And I suspect it's essential to know what your services are for and who they're for. That way you don't waste time on those who aren't interested or those who are really looking for a different solution. Again, business and marketing, it's something we have the privilege and the opportunity to do. It's an opportunity to create meaning, and it's an opportunity to create connectivity. Do you have a strong opinion one way or another about my thoughts here? And if so, would you be interested in a longer discussion on the topic? These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. All the sponsors here provide helpful products or services that you'll find beneficial in your clinical work. Want to get better at treating concussions and other neurological conditions? Clayton Shu has some innovative methods. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. Later in the show, Jane offers you helpful suggestions on how to raise your rates, and Golden Flower Chinese Herbs shares a journey of healing that I think you'll recognize. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Geological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more. Ever found yourself listening to a geological conversation and thinking, wow, I needed to hear that? Yeah, me too. And I never know when I'm going to hear a guest say something that stops my world and reboots it with a larger perspective. If these conversations have ever helped you to feel more grounded, more inspired, or just less alone in this strange and wonderful work we do, consider becoming a member or supporting the podcast with a bit of tithing to the donation jar. It helps keep the lights on here at the Geological Sound and Motion Lab so that we can bring you these conversations every Tuesday morning. You'll find all the details at geological.com. Thanks for listening and for being a part of this.
Hey there, I'm Cameron Jafari, an acupuncturist from Los Angeles. So I started learning nanopuncture from Dr. Clayton Shu because I was facing these complex neurological conditions like stroke and MS in my clinic, and I just felt like I lacked a solid process to treat them. Brain-related issues always felt like a whole different animal, and I was looking for a clinical system that worked and could guide me through them. So after attending my first nanopuncture seminar, I was able to apply the process pretty quickly and with pretty amazing results. I remember the first stroke patient I saw afterwards was a guy who had had a stroke 2 years back, and he couldn't talk at all. And after a few treatments, he started saying a few words. And a few treatments after that, he could actually have conversations. It was pretty incredible. So this is why I feel like nanopuncture is the future of acupuncture neurology. And you can be a part of that. Their next seminar is on treating concussions and is being co-taught by both Dr. Shu and Dr. Ayla Wolf in New York City on April 26th and 27th. To learn more, visit nanopunctureseminars.com.
My guest today is Lorraine Wilcox. You know, Lorraine probably doesn't need much of an introduction. She's notorious, especially if you're over on the Distraction Machine Facebook. She's got a bunch of sites there. She has her fingers in all kinds of the Chinese medicine pie. But the part of the pie that we're going to be talking about today is the Yi Jing. And the other thing is we're going to talk about medicine too. Anyway, hey, Lorraine, welcome once again to Geological.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate being here.
I'm excited. This time I get to talk to you. I'd like to begin with how people have wandered themselves into whatever it is that this conversation is about. Whatever, it's like, what got you to where you are? Nobody went to that high school career counseling thing and had someone recommend, oh yeah, why don't you try Chinese medicine or Chinese language or, that kind of stuff. I'd like to know how you got interested in the I Ching.
I'm an old hippie, and so I had heard about it, but I actually had never been interested in it. When I went to acupuncture school, which I started in 1986, my first teacher, I actually don't think he was very good for, the basic theories or fundamentals class. He's English speaker, didn't speak or read Chinese. And there were very few books then. And, it was supposed to be a 3-hour class, and he'd often end after an hour and a half. But one time in the fundamentals class in my very first quarter, he said, "Oh, let me show you how to do a reading with the Yi Jing." And so I just was fascinated by it. I tend to work on obsession. I get obsessed with things intensely, and then after a while, I'm over it. But with the I Ching, I stayed obsessed with it for a long time. So, I bought a copy of the book and I got 3 coins and I started asking questions all the time because at that point my life was fairly chaotic. I'm good at stirring things up, or at least I was in the past. I just found that sometimes I couldn't understand what it was telling me, but when I could understand, it was always 100% accurate. So that just kind of made me want to keep playing with it. And, eventually I got to understand more and more, little by little. So that was my introduction to it. I didn't read any Chinese then.
So it kind of came from the periphery. You were just studying Chinese medicine. Your teacher says, "Hey, check this out." And you went, "Ooh,
Yeah.
wow."
I mean, he showed us how to do it. It wasn't just, you should check this out, but he showed us how to do it. And yeah, it was kind of love at first sight.
What's the best way to craft a question for the I Ching? My suspicion is if you know how to ask the right kind of question in the right kind of way, it's probably going to be more helpful.
It's true. And at that point, I was doing a lot of divination, both for myself, and later I started, if somebody I knew was having trouble, I'd ask for them. One of the most important things, I think, is to let go of what you want the answer to be and try to be in a neutral place where you can read it rather than reading into it what you want to hear. So if I was really in a moment of turmoil, that's not a good time to ask. I'd have to do whatever to calm myself so I could be open to listening. I think that's the most important thing. And then there's all this other stuff, like you can't ask yes and no questions because life isn't always yes and no questions. And
Well, it's usually more nuanced than that.
yes, yes, yes. And you should have a time frame when you're asking, so that if you say, "Will I be able to do this or get this?" And then it says, "Oh, there'll be some turmoil, but eventually you'll get there." But you don't know if it means, next week or next month or 10 years from now if you don't have a time frame in mind when you're asking. So that was another important thing.
Do you usually do it these days with the 3 coins still, or do you use the sticks, or?
I have stopped divining a long time ago. I could still do it. I would still do it if I had a reason, but I have less turmoil in my life now, so I have less questions to ask. And I studied with a feng shui teacher since 1993 or 94. And he not only became just like teaching me how to do feng shui or anything like that, but he became kind of a mentor in a lot of ways. And one of the things that he would always say, there's a Chinese saying that when you're good at I Ching, you don't need to divine. I'm not saying I'm good at I Ching, but I've found as time goes on, I need to ask questions less because I kind of understand how the universe works a little better. I mean, that sounds pretty grandiose, and I don't mean it that way, but like now I know what causes chaos in my life, so I don't go there anymore. Now I know kind of how to act better and how to make better choices. So it's more like I've absorbed some of the thinking, and then I don't need to like ask it because I already kind of know. But I would ask it if I felt a need to.
I'm really struck by that. When you're good at the I Ching, you don't need to divine. I mean, when I think about like working in the clinic, practicing medicine, there are days where it's just not coming together and I'm kind of thinking about theory and I'm working with very basic building block stuff because it's like all I can do to orient myself. And then there are the other days I don't think about what I'm doing at all. I just do it.
It flows.
You know, it just flows. And it sounds
Yeah.
like, I think with anything that we learn, music's the same way. At first you're really working the chords, you're really paying attention. And then at a certain point, you just play music. So it sounds like with the I Ching, once you grasp it in a certain way, it's like gaining a second language. It's already there for you.
I think so. So part of my kind of reluctance for doing this interview is that I haven't actually sat down and used it in such a long time, but it's just kind of become a part of me, almost like not exactly like a voice in my head because, I don't hear voices, but, if I stop and think about whatever the problem is, I usually can decide to do the right thing rather than avoidance or building up anxiety and freaking out and getting people all agitated. I usually can actually know how to act if I stop and listen, which I had problems with in the past.
So it's really helped you to develop yourself in a certain way into a different kind of person.
Yes. And my teacher, he really looked down on divination in that sense. He really thought that was like the lowest possible level of the I Ching. That was really useful to me because, if you're an old hippie and if you live in the West and mostly what you hear about is divining with 3 coins, and then if somebody's really fancy, they'll use the 50 sticks and so forth. But that's just like a wandering beggar's tricks or something like that. It's not really what the I Ching is for, but it's so much all we know in the West.
Well, then you're the perfect person to talk to today about this. What did your teacher say was a higher form? What did he talk about there?
So, for one thing, the I Ching, which includes the commentaries that go with it, it's not just 64 hexagrams and, the lines and the text for those hexagrams and lines, but there's also a body of that's often called in English the 10 wings, which are attributed to Confucius. And among that, there's one that's called the Great Treatise, or it's hard to pronounce the pinyin, but Shitsa Zhuan. And like that is the most amazing document there are parts that are still mysterious and parts I don't understand and parts I don't get, but the parts that I get, it's just like reading Neijing, you go back and read it and you see something you never saw before, and it's just like the light bulb goes on over your head. And so basically studying it for the philosophy, which does include the lines and the hexagrams, but it also includes the other texts that surround it, then being able to see the world through different eyes after you've absorbed it is really kind of the goal. I will add one more thing, though, is in feng shui, or at least in the styles of feng shui that I study, there's a lot of calculation stuff, to figure out the time periods and the current chi of the universe this year, the annual chi, and all that kind of stuff. And the calculations are also I Ching based. So in I Ching, besides the text and the words, there's number and image, or image and number, shangshu. So he was very much into calculations, but he wasn't into throwing coins. And he was very much into the philosophy and the words, also the Tao Te Ching. This isn't the teacher in acupuncture school. This is the feng shui teacher. Yeah.
What kinds of things did you notice shifting in your life once you just started getting the I Ching in your bones, so to speak? When you made that shift from, I kind of need to use a divination to orient myself, to, I've kind of got a self-correcting autopilot going on now because the I Ching is inside of me.
So it's a little hard to isolate that because also at the same time I started studying things like the Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi, and it's a cumulative effect or a synergistic effect. And so to try and isolate this to the I Ching, I mean, I can try and address that, but I feel like all of them have worked on me and changed me. And I still very much have a lot of liver chi, but I can manage it better than before. So it's not like I'm inherently a different person and I haven't become a bodhisattva, although I wouldn't mind if I could do that. But definitely I'm not the same person as before.
I can see your point. If you're studying I Ching, you're studying Zhuangzi, you're studying Tao Te Ching. Oh man, that would just have to take your conceptual framework and totally like liquefy it and turn it into something else.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, it's a slow process, and I'm an impatient person, but somehow I've never lost interest in those books. And year after year, you just absorb a little bit more and a little bit more, and your life becomes more simple, and you stop stirring things up quite so much. And even when you have trouble, your recovery time is quicker in understanding what happened and why, and how can I improve myself. And I mean, I don't know if this is I Ching or Tao Te Ching or what, but I was just thinking the other day about pain. And of course, nobody wants pain, but pain is an amazing tool for you to figure out how to look at things differently. And when I was younger, I had a fair amount of emotional pain because I did keep stirring things up in my own life and various other reasons. But now that I'm older, I have a certain amount of physical pain. I mean, I'm not complaining, it's not a big deal. But one of the things I've had to figure out is like, we're so resistant to feeling the slightest sliver of pain, and we just want a drug or something to stop it. And who said you're not going to experience pain? I mean, it's just one of the changes, and pain comes and goes and gets better and gets worse. And when you resist it, it actually makes it a lot worse. So I mean, I use herbs, I use acupuncture, I use various methods of dealing with physical pain, but not resisting is a big thing that I think does have to do with change theory, because everything changes, including your levels of physical comfort, and they'll change again. And in fact, as a doctor, I think experiencing pain makes me more compassionate towards patients. I mean, I was fortunate for so much of my life never being in pain, except if I hurt myself and then it would heal or something like that. And I think in the beginning, I was less sympathetic to pain patients because I just didn't understand how life-changing it could be. And then the first time I had some serious pain, I had some frozen shoulder like some years ago. That's all gone and so forth. It's like, oh, now I get what these patients are going through. And frozen shoulder is not serious, but it can be excruciating. Pain is beneficial, and so why resist it? Why not find ways to pass through it more gracefully? At the same time, trying to alleviate it, but I don't need to take all kinds of heavy drugs so that I don't feel one bit of pain. I mean, pain is something that can make you grow.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that I use to keep my practice running smoothly. So, let's talk about something that can be a little bit uncomfortable: raising your fees. I know, this is something that might feel awkward, but it doesn't have to. With a bit of planning and care, you can handle it in a way that feels right for you and your patients. One tip: give yourself at least 2 months to prepare. This gives you time to get comfortable with the change and let your patients know what's happening. You can share the news through emails, booking reminders, or even just a friendly little sign in your clinic, and avoid over-apologizing. Instead, keep it straightforward and matter-of-fact. Keeping things consistent across the ways that you communicate can really help avoid confusion. Fee increases aren't always easy, but you're not on your own here. For more tips and ideas on how to communicate these changes with confidence, check out frontdesk.chain.app and look for the article, How to Tell Your Clients You're Raising Your Fees. Oh, and one last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. I'm thinking of a time I generally do not have pain, but I wrenched my back at one point, and it was right around the time I was looking at a new clinic, which was a second floor walk up. And with a wrenched back, I went up those stairs and realized there is no way I can rent this clinic
Yeah.
because I'm going to have patients like me coming in here. And I had no idea
Yeah. Yeah.
just how much of a barrier that was going to be for them. So sometimes it is really useful. And I've seen this with patients too. They've got something, it could be physical pain, it could be emotional pain, it could just be screaming anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all they want to do is just get as far away from it as possible. And so often that wanting to get away from it really locks it in.
Yeah. At some point, I started getting some tinnitus, and it would give me anxiety because I'd think, oh my goodness, do I have high blood pressure right now? Do I have this? Am I going to have a wind stroke? Blah, blah, blah. And somewhere I read that one of the best things you can do with tinnitus, besides, of course, treating it to try and get better, but is just to make friends with it and not resist it so much. And when I stopped resisting and just started trying to find ways to live with it, it was so much less bothersome. So, yes, the goal is to heal and not have it at all. But I mean, in the meantime, you need to find ways to live with things. And I think books like the Tao Te Ching and the Yi Jing make me better able to cope with discomforts and changes, whether it's, these physical changes I've been talking about or life changes.
Not the Tao Te Ching, although the Tao Te Ching, yes, could work this way, but the I Ching in particular, it's kind of a roadmap. It's like, here's a situation and it can go like this, or it can go like this, or it could go like this. You're not just in this, oh my God, it's like this, I'm stuck forever. But you see that there's possible pathways. Do I have that right, or am I just making stuff up?
When I was divining, let me tell you about one instance. My daughter was born like 4 months before I graduated from acupuncture school. It wasn't planned that way, but life happens. And then my ex wasn't working and he wasn't very interested in working. So I was like doing acupuncture school. I was like supporting me and my daughter and my ex. He wasn't my ex then. And I was becoming increasingly unhappy. You don't need all the details, but I also was reluctant just to walk out because the effects it would have on my daughter. If I didn't have a child, I would have just left pretty quickly. But, with a child, you have to think differently. So I asked the I Ching, what would be the results for all of us involved if I were to leave this now, meaning in the immediate future as soon as possible? Because I told you you've got to have a time idea. It gave me like, no, not now. I don't remember the exact hexagram, but it was definitely don't do it at this point. And so every 6 months, because you're not supposed to repeatedly ask the same question in a short period of time, or it'll kind of feel harassed. So every 6 months, I'd ask again. And when my daughter was about 4.5, I asked and it said, go for it. And at that point, I said to my daughter, how would you feel if your father and I didn't live together, but you still saw him all the time? You lived with me, but you still saw him a lot. And she said, well, then at least you wouldn't be grouching at each other all the time. So I figured she was cool with it, and I left, and she's an amazing person. She's 30 now. She's an amazing person, and we're all okay. But I used it at that point to kind of advise me about when would be the smoothest thing, not just for me or not just for me to follow my urges and so forth, but to make the situation kind of work for all of us. And it really seemed to tell me the right thing.
I love it that your daughter was old enough that you could actually include her in it. And you also got the confirmation from her. Boy, talk about hitting on all cylinders. Let's move this conversation a little bit then from the divination piece, which actually I've got a mild interest in it, but not nearly as much interest in the divination side of the house as I do in the medical side of the house.
Can I say one more thing about divination, though?
Sure.
I'm kind of, like I said, an obsessive person, but a little bit of a chaotic person. And I never would have sat down and studied the I Ching at that point, just, going over it in some kind of linear order and studying it. But because, we're all obsessed with me, right? It's all about me. And I was kind of troubled at that point in my life. I asked the questions relatively frequently. And so little by little, you get different hexagrams and then you study them because they're relevant to me. And so even though I didn't do it systematically the way a Chinese scholar might have studied in the past, but little by little, I absorbed it because it was relevant rather than just something like school study, And so I don't think divination is bad. I think it's a good entryway, but I think it's not a place to get stuck.
Well, I love the way that you frame this, that you could study it in a scholarly way. That's usually a little bit dry. Or you could do it from this sort of hands-on, I need to know this stuff. When you say, oh, there's certain hexagrams that show up a lot, I don't use it for divination a lot, but I use it on occasion in a very chaotic way because I basically don't know what I'm doing. But I have noticed that there are certain hexagrams, those damn things are following me around.
Definitely, I get that. The one I always used to get, I don't know if I'd still get it because I don't divine much anymore, but I always get the one that says, I think it's 44, it says, the woman is too strong.
Yeah, right.
I always get the one, it's like, oh, I should relax a little. I should slow down. I should lighten up.
My earliest remembrance of the I Ching, I had the yellow one. Who was that? It was the one translated from German. Baines?
The Wilhelm Barnes.
Wilhelm Barnes, yeah.
Yeah.
Back in my hippie days.
Baines? Maybe it's Baines. I don't know.
Yeah, whatever. The yellow one with the forward by C.G. Jung. That part was cool.
Uh-huh.
And I can remember constantly coming across the phrase, perseverance furthers. And it's like, oh, God, really? Couldn't this just be easier? No, perseverance furthers. Like, keep at it. Ugh.
Yeah.
God, I hated that. Anyway, anything else to say about divination before we jump into the medical side?
I don't think so.
I'd like to know more about the medical side and how you see this connecting up with medicine. In particular, if you see connections between the I Ching and like the Liu Jing, the 6 confirmations, or the Wuxing, the 5 phases, that kind of thing. Do you see connections?
There are all these books in Chinese and a few in English that go over all these kinds of like systematizing medicine according to the I Ching or aspects of medicine. And I've totally lost interest in that because, like my feng shui teacher would say, it's kind of like party tricks or something like that. It's kind of like a magician that can impress the crowd, but is it really meaningful? I don't find it really meaningful. So, and there seems to be this urge even among some Chinese people to make more and more complex calculations and more complex correlations. And like, the I Ching and the Tao Te Ching, they're kind of about simplicity and the way nature works, and they're not about making it more and more complex. And so I've kind of lost interest. I mean, I really liked that stuff for a while, and I tried to learn all of these complex correlations and calculations, but that's not what the I Ching is to me. The I Ching is like the operating system, and those kind of things are like apps. I'd rather focus on getting the operating system downloaded into my brain than learning all these apps but forgetting about the operating system.
Now I'm really curious about how myself or someone listening to this could begin to engage the I Ching in a way, like a hacker, for example. How do we approach it as an operating system?
So Once again, I would suggest that people get a translation of Shitsu Zhuan, which is hard to say, but the Great Treatise, or it's sometimes called Appended Sentences, and it's 2 volumes of commentary that are attributed to Confucius. And yeah, if you want to divine and use the I Ching and get, familiar with the hexagrams, that's a great thing. It's a good thing. But the operating system is kind of described in those 2 volumes, which are in the Wilhelm Baines or whatever it's called, and they're also translated in other volumes. And you can even get translations for free online, although they're really old and not very good by today's standards. There were a lot of Christians that translated the I Ching, and then they use all of this kind of almost Christian terminology. So some of the free versions you can get online are kind of Christianized. But anyway, these 2 volumes are really where there's a discussion of how the I Ching works and why the hexagrams mean what they mean, and just the underlying philosophy of it. And it's a really pretty amazing document. There's sentences, there are parts of it that are totally obscure and I don't have a clue what they're talking about, and there are parts of it that don't interest me, but the parts of it that are good are just simply amazing. One of the things it talks about a lot is this concept of image, which is the main way I use I Ching in understanding medicine, in understanding the operating system of medicine. So this concept of image, the word in Chinese is xiang, Xiang, fourth tone. As Chinese medicine modernized, and I don't just mean TCM in the 1950s and stuff like that, but even in the late 19th century and into the early 20th century, there was this move to modernize and so forth. They wanted to make the medicine sound more and more scientific, I would say pseudoscientific, and they wanted to kind of remove some of the more poetic aspects. Or once I understood that image was the way ancient people looked at the medicine, I've really tried to pull that back in and use it in my teaching. And so actually in my slideshows when I teach, I do use a lot of photos and images to try and implant the images in the students' minds. This is how they understood it. So for example, if you want to take the image of the body, is one of the images is a country, right? And the border walls are the skin. There are quotes that support this from Sun Tzu Miao and earlier. And the organs are the government, which is in Suen chapter 8. And while not all of the government officials make sense to me, but the liver as the military general does make a lot of sense. Then when you think of the pulse of the liver, for example, we often call it wiry, but they didn't have wire back then. The word actually means bowstring, like the string of a bow. And you know what they made bowstrings from? Sinews, which are associated with the liver. And the bow is a military weapon, and the liver is a military general, made of wood. And not only that, they used composite bows in the Han Dynasty and later, and in other places in the world. A composite bow, you glue, or I don't know the process exactly, but you glue horn on the inside curve of the bow and you glue sinew on the outside, and the horn makes the bow stronger and the sinew makes the bow more flexible. So actually in bow making, you would use sinew to increase flexibility. So this association of liver with wood, with sinew, with a bowstring pulse, with the military general, it's totally one image, or a bunch of related images. It's not random stuff. When I went to school, it was random stuff that we all had to memorize. But once I started applying the concept of image, I could find the connections. And so when something doesn't make sense to me, I try to think, how would a Han Dynasty person see this? What technology did they have in the Han Dynasty that would be reflected in this. And that often helps me come to an answer that connects everything that before seemed disjointed. But it's all because I understand that an image is a concept that came from the I Ching before Neijing was written, and Neijing is full of it, and all the medical books up until 200 years ago were full of this concept of image. I mean, they didn't say, I'm going to talk about image now. They just used the images, but we've stripped them away because.
They just used it and people just understood it.
So it's a way of looking and seeing things differently, looking for the image. Yeah.
This makes a lot of sense. I think back on when I was in acupuncture school, and yes, so much stuff seemed so random. Some of it fit together, some of it was like flying out in the wind, like that small intestine, the fu organ of the heart. It's like flapping out in the wind.
That's a little difficult. I've looked in old books and I really have never found any book, old or new, Chinese or English, that really can give an explanation that feels like, there's the answer.
Well, what you were just talking about with image, and it makes me think about resonance, because images have resonance, and images, they don't come from our linear, scholarly person sitting in a study with a teacup working this stuff out. It comes from all of your experience, and it comes from the world as it is and your experience with the world. And it comes from a series of resonances, right? Like that set of bells that they had in the Han Dynasty where you can hit one bell and other ones will ring.
Yes.
Right?
Or just like if you have a guitar sitting in leaning up against the wall and you hit a tuning fork with an A tuning fork, the A string will vibrate in resonance. So yes, things that have the same image resonate with each other. Or we use the word correspond, but break it down to co-respond. They respond to each other. They respond with each other.
And in the image gives us a very full, incredibly textual, not just visual, but you can put sound and emotion and experience and everything into an image. It's just dense with information. Whereas if you're just writing out words,
Yeah.
not so much.
Yeah. You have to kind of cultivate seeing the images in things, but we have a modern mind, a Western mind, and a modern mind. So the part of the cultivation is not necessarily seeing the images that me, Lorraine, who grew up in New York State, would naturally come by, but I have to know a little bit about Chinese culture to see images in the same way. So therefore, when I read history and anthropology and philosophy books that aren't specifically related to medicine, but they really can help me better see the images.
This brings up another question for me, and this is a question I've had for a long time, and not just about the Yi Jing, but really about much of Chinese medicine in general. How do we, as English-speaking Westerners that grew up nowhere near China, didn't grow up anywhere with the Chinese language, let alone Chinese thought, Chinese language, Chinese ways of thinking from centuries ago? I mean, even modern Chinese don't understand this stuff.
Correct.
Right? So here we are attempting to approach this stuff, and we are so separate in time and space. But are there bridges, or how do you build bridges, or how do you find ways of connecting where you are as a modern woman with stuff that was written thousands of years ago in a completely other part of the world that has nothing to do with what we've grown up with?
It is a cultivation, it's not something that you can just instantly have. And it's funny, I graduated from acupuncture school in 1988, and I'm still every once in a while, the light bulb is going on, and I'm realizing that I'm not seeing something correctly because I was taught by modern people and that what they said couldn't possibly be true if I look at it from an ancient person's point of view. I'm still unlearning things that I learned in acupuncture school. It's kind of funny, but so some people are really, really practical and they just want to know how do you treat and how do you make your patients get better? And that's like a very, very good thing. I'm, for better or for worse, not a very practical person. I'm a book person and I like knowledge for knowledge's sake, even if it has no use or no apparent use at this time. And so, like, I mean, actually, I'll tell you something. I haven't had my TV on since the presidential debates before the last election. Um, I don't. I mean, I do waste a lot of time on Facebook, but like what I like doing most is reading and translating and exploring this kind of stuff. It's the one thing I've never gotten tired of. I'm a Gemini and I'm a snake and I'm always jumping from thing to thing, but I never got tired of Chinese medicine once I learned how to read Chinese. And so I don't know, it's something that I've been cultivating for years and I still have a lot of cultivation to do. But like basically what I say is, kind of my time period is the Ming Dynasty, even though, I talk about Yi Jing and Nei Jing, but a Ming Dynasty doctor would also be reading those things, and studying them and so forth. And so what I tend to say is like, my goal is to cultivate a virtual Ming mind. And I know it's impossible. I'll never get there, but that's what I'm trying to grow in my garden, is a virtual Ming Dynasty doctor's mind. And I just keep at it year after year. But, I'm more of a translator than a practitioner.
Imagine this. A patient walks into your clinic. They're carrying more than the pain in their body. There's a story there. A history woven with the stress of long days, the ache of things unsaid, and the quiet longing for something to shift. You listen, not just with your ears, but with your hands, your intuition, your heart. It's not just about needles or a formula. It's about connection. Understanding the threads that tie us together, mind, body, and spirit. That is where golden flower Chinese herbs comes in. Rooted in tradition and crafted with care, their formulas are more than herbs. They're a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern practice. Every bottle, a quiet partner in your work, helping you to meet your patients where they are. Because healing isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about creating trust, cultivating belonging, and helping someone feel truly seen. Golden Flower Chinese Herbs, your partner in practice and connection, where tradition meets care. Since you are working on a virtual reality Ming mind, how does a Ming mind view time and space differently than our modern minds?
That's a good question. I mean, I have some things I can say about time, but I don't know if I have a deep answer. But, translating things, like let's say I translate formulas and how to, different formulas and how to make them and so forth. And it will say, boil it for the length of time it takes to eat a meal, or for the length of time it takes to walk 3 li, which is about a mile, or boil it for 3 boilings, which basically it's a weird procedure, but you bring it to a boil and then you add a spoonful of water so it slows down and then it gets back to a boil again. That's 1 boiling. And then you add another spoonful of water and wait till it boils again. That's 2. And you do it a 3rd time. That's 3 boilings. They didn't have, or a lot of times it says boil it down to 70% of the volume because they didn't have a clock like we have. I mean, yeah, clocks in the Ming Dynasty, the emperor had some, maybe some rich people had some that came from Europe. Yeah, they had sundials. Yeah, they had incense sticks that were calibrated, but they didn't use time as thinking of it in such a precise way that we do. And they had other ways of measuring it. Or when you make pills, it's like make the pill the size of a soybean or something like that. They didn't really give measurements for the size of things in many, many cases. So they just, had a different way of relating to things, more by phenomena in terms of how long to boil it than by like minutes on the clock. And so it's really different.
Well, and I think about it these days, especially because I see people wearing Fitbits, and they're like measuring their steps. I mean, no one goes out for a walk anymore. They're getting their so many steps because they're wearing this thing because they're trying to tick some marks and they're trying to get their sleep a certain way and make sure they drink all the water they're supposed to drink and blah, blah, blah. Things that we used to use simply to measure time, now we are using to, sort of gamify ourselves. Talk about time and space being different. But yeah, back in the Ming Dynasty, how would you make sense of time? The size of a certain bean, how long it takes you to walk to the marketplace, which would be different than how long it takes you to walk up and get a bucket of water from the mountain stream.
Yeah, yeah.
But these would be the measures that people embedded in that time and space would naturally have. It would make complete and utter sense to them.
Have you noticed some people, if you ask them, do you tend to be thirsty? And they'll just want to answer, well, I drink, 8-ounce glasses a day. Yeah, but are you thirsty, or are you drinking that because you should? Well, I always drink that because we should, and you can't even get them to say if they're thirsty or not. They don't even know. All they know is the measure of how much they're supposed to drink. Have you noticed that?
All the time. All the time. I had a woman in just the other day. Yeah, same thing. Very difficult to get her to talk about thirst. And when I came to realize with actually many of the patients that I've got, they are not in touch enough with their own being to know if they're thirsty or not. Number one, they've outsourced how much water they should have to something on the internet that said, what is it, your shoe size divided by 3 times your height? I don't know. There's some, where the hell did that water thing come from? I'm thinking to myself, you see all this stuff on the internet about, if you're not hydrated, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, how did we live past, into the year 2000 before we were worried about hydration?
How did the Chinese live? Because these people, they say nothing counts but pure water. And, Chinese didn't tend to drink water. They drank tea, they drank other things. They drank liquor. They didn't drink water. So if you need that much water and tea doesn't count, then all the Chinese should have been dead by now.
Yeah, it's a curious thing. So this brings me back to the Yi Jing.
Yeah, sorry.
As an operating system.
Uh-huh.
No, it's great. This is actually the perfect tangent. Oh my God, I'm actually sitting down to write something for my clinic newsletter, and the lead article is, "Are you drinking enough water?" And I'm going to be going on my rant because, you get these people, they've got puffy tongues, they've got edema, they're drinking a gallon of water. Their skin is dry, their mouth is dry. Well, my mouth is dry. I guess I should be drinking. They're so waterlogged they can't get fluids up to their mouth. I know it's very contradictory for regular people to think this, but if you get yourself unwaterlogged, guess what? Your skin's going to get better and your mouth is going to get wetter as well.
Have you seen the article by Subhuti Dharmananda? It's from like a long time ago, but about, this water drinking myth. It's pretty good.
I'll go check that out. That will be helpful. So this brings me back to thinking about the Yi Jing as an operating system, because right now in our modern world, how do we know what's healthy for us? Most of it has been outsourced outside of our bodies, outside of our experience. There's some expert who's going to tell us what's good for us or what's not good for us. And that's not just what we eat and how much water we should drink, but, I suspect the kind of life that you're supposed to live, all that stuff. It sounds like the Yi Jing can help us get back to a slower and maybe more natural sensibility of how change unfolds, and more importantly, how we can place ourselves within that change that's unfolding.
I totally agree. And I also, once again, think the Tao Te Ching is really good. And once again, with both of these books, with all of these books, there are just parts you have to jump over because you don't understand and they don't make sense, or even you don't like them. But then there's gems that you find that speak to you in this moment. And if you read it again a year later, it'll be other things that jump out because you've changed and your situation has changed and your understanding has changed and your needs have changed. I mean, one of the things that I would recommend to people is just to read them repeatedly. Like, just read a couple paragraphs before you go to bed. Like, that is also is including the Shitsa Chuan, which I still can't say. Every night read a couple paragraphs before you go to bed, and kind of as you're falling asleep, meditate on it. Or I don't know if meditate's too strong a word, ponder it, whatever, and just let it absorb little by little, and it does work on you and change you. I really love both of those books, Yi Jing and Dao De Jing.
I think about certain books that I've read over the years. I read them as teenagers. I read them as a young man. I read them as an older man. They kind of show me who I am at this moment in time, because the stuff that I read 30 years ago, I read it, but it doesn't hold anything. There's other stuff that I read now, and it's like, oh, yeah, I see that. This feels like a leading edge of some sort. There's some real juice in it. Seems like these kinds of books, they're really mirrors. They give us an opportunity to see what is up for us in this moment. It's like, how do you know where to navigate? Well, just go where the juice is. Probably a good way to go.
Maybe by the time we're 120, we'll become sages.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great word. We hear about sages, we hear about immortals and that kind of stuff. For that matter, we hear about masters all the time. Most of us will never be masters. How many of us will get to be sages? What does it mean? What does it actually mean to be a sage? From the Chinese perspective that you have been immersing yourself in, what does a sage look like? How would you recognize one on the street?
Well, maybe the word has been used differently at different times, but basically, a sage is a ordinary human being. It's not somebody with superpowers or anything, but it's one who's just really become so wise and can see what other people don't see, underlying the subtext, and know how to respond in a way that will be beneficial for the most part. But like you and I, we could become sages. I mean, I doubt that I will, but it's not impossible. It's not like becoming a deity or something like that. That's impossible. Becoming an immortal, I think, I don't know if immortals exist or not, but for me, it's impossible at this stage. It takes more magic than I have, or more cultivation than I'm willing to give. But sagehood, anyone could if they work on themselves. I still have a long way to go, though.
Well, this seems like a pretty good place to start winding it down. That's a real gem there. Do you have any English language versions of these books that you particularly like or that you would recommend? Or is this the kind of thing where you just have to go read through a couple of different versions and see what lights your fire?
The ones that I like best might not be the ones that other people would like best, because since I've spent some time working through it and since I've studied Chinese language, then I want ones that are more linguistically oriented. But for example, for divination, if somebody wants to attempt divination just as a way to see what it's all about or see if it works, what I've always told people to do in the past is to throw a hexagram and then go to a bookstore, although there are hardly bookstores anymore, but to look, let's say if you get hexagram 51, to go to the bookstore and like sit down and read hexagram 51 and all the different versions of the I Ching and see which one speaks to you. And that just to know that if you do fall in love with the I Ching, that version won't necessarily be the one you'll always favor, but I think it's as it changes you, then the translation that you want to use also changes. My favorite one in the beginning was Master Knees, and now that's like the last one I'd look at, because he really explained everything, and at that point I needed lots of explanation. But now I know, well, that's his explanation, and if I resonate with it, great, and if I don't resonate with it, then that's not the book for me anymore. And I want a book now more that really is like what the I Ching actually says and not somebody's interpretation of it. And then I feel like I'm at this stage where I can kind of work out my own interpretation of what it actually means. But I never would have liked the books I like now back then. Start with whatever speaks to you and then be willing to buy another version when you feel like you've grown a bit.
Well, that's just exactly like Chinese medicine, isn't it? Patients ask me this all the time. Well, is this a good herb for me to take? Right? Sometimes they read something on the internet. Is this a good herb for me to take? Well, depends at what time and for what reason and what else is going on. It might be, right? At a certain point, it's just right. At another point, not helpful. At another point, it would be harmful. We can use that basic Chinese medicine thinking of ours to recognize that things are appropriate at a certain time, and at other times they just may not be.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to be too rigid. You know, some people who get into more scholarly stuff, then they look down on people who aren't at that stage. But I mean, I developed through a series of, I don't know, level makes it sound like I'm at a higher level now. Maybe I am, but, you know, I'm at a different level now. And so if we're talking about change theory, we shouldn't think there's one version that's good for everyone. It changes. Yeah, change theory.
Lorraine, thank you so much for the time today. It's been an absolute delight to sit down and go over the I Ching like this. Really appreciate it.
It's not much tangible, you know, all the calculations and methods of like making everything correlate to everything is more tangible stuff, but I don't think that's the heart of it.
All right, that's it for today's conversation. Hey, if you guys like what you're hearing here, if it's helpful to you, please tell your friends about it. Also, I'm kind of curious. I can look at the download statistics for this podcast, and I see, obviously, there's people in North America that listen to this. There's folks in Australia, Russia, Japan, China. Oh, China, imagine that, China. And I'm wondering where it is that you're listening to this podcast from. So if you don't mind, if you're listening to this right now, pull out your phone or maybe go buy a postcard. Take a picture. Let me see where it is that you listen to Qiological from. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.